The X-Men are, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the greatest teams within comic books. What started out as Stan Lee's easy way of writing character backstories in a
What if they're mutants? What if they were born that way?
sort of a way, it quickly struck a chord with the civil rights era in the 1960s, became a hit under Chris Claremont's 17-year run in the 1970s, and still holds the record for best-selling American single-issue comic of all time, with 1991's X-Men #1 at roughly 8.2 million copies sold. To date, there have been 5 animated television series, 2 live-action series, 13 live-action films, and from what I count on the Marvel database, a whopping 1,931 issues since September 1963, and that's not even including the 89 team-up series, the 483 other X-Men issues outside the main Earth 616 reality, and if my math is right, that is 2,503 issues. And I promise you, there's at least one character in there that you'll love. And of course there's always going to be the main group of X-Men. Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, and later on, Wolverine, Colossus, Storm, and Nightcrawler. When the MCU does finally get around to reintroducing the X-Men and Deadpool into the film series, we can be sure that most of them, if not all of them, are going to show up in some sort of fashion in leading roles. They're too important not to. But there have been hundreds of characters to be one of Xavier's extra powerful mutants. A good number of them just aren't going to be brought over. Like this guy, Random, who made a really cool toy in the 90s and that's it. Or this thing, Dupe. It beat Thor in a one-on-one fight. Or Shark Girl. She can turn into a shark. Actually, she's a pretty cool character. Yeah, there's a lot of dud characters out there, but I don't think anyone's clamoring for a live-action Longneck anytime soon. But what about all the characters that had a real impact on the comics but haven't been given much love anywhere else? There's also all the X-Men that had one-off appearances who could use more screen time. Gambit, Jubilee, and Psylocke, just to name a few. Honorable mentions, I guess. But for the most part, they were done pretty well in their one films. They could use more time, but these characters need it. If the MCU wants to rebrand from the Fox X-Men films without all the baggage of the older films, or, the ones that actually do need a redo, these are my picks for the top 10 X-Men characters who are due for their time to shine. Number 10, Darwin. Darwin is a relatively less impactful character compared to everyone else on this list, hence why he's just number 10, but he is overpowered. His mutation gives him the ability to never die. If the building is on fire, he's fireproof. If all the air is poison, he can now breathe in it. If he goes one-on-one against Hela, the goddess of death, he gains Hela's powers. If he faces a raging Hulk, he just teleports out of there. He's not dying to that. But even fans who aren't hardcore comic fans knew something was up when this guy whose only power is to spontaneously never die, just died in X-Men First Class. He doesn't need to be a lead or anything. He was never anything more than a supporting character anyways. But a little justice for Darwin and maybe not kill a powerful character just for shock value when their power is to not die. Anyways, number 9, Firestar. In the early 80s, there was a Saturday morning cartoon called Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. In it, Peter Parker was just going to college when his 2 other friends just happened to be former X-Men, Iceman and Firestar. And they get up to all sorts of superhero shenanigans while trying to do classwork. And hey, would you look at that? That's exactly where Peter Parker currently is in the MCU. And the two even started dating for a bit in the cartoon, which it does work out pretty well since MJ's off in MIT. Firestar, as her name implies, uses fire, can fly, because she was actually supposed to be a quick substitute when they couldn't get the rights to the Human Torch. But her wholly original character actually worked out better in the end. She later appeared in the comic books, but she was more closely linked to Spider-Man and any of his stories than the rest of the X-Men. Later on, becoming best friends with Black Cat, Hellcat, and Spectrum in a Sex and the City ripoff. And a fun little side note, during the second annual X-Men vote held in 2022, she was actually voted the number 1 character out of the new lineup. So if there's any time to bring her in, it's now. Number 8, Thunderbird. There's probably no single issue more important to the history of the X-Men than Giant Size X-Men #1 by Len Wein and illustrated by Dave Cockrum. In it, Charles Xavier recruits a new team of mutants to rescue most of the members of the original 1960s lineup. Their first mission was a success, and this new team would lead the X-Men going forward. John Proudstar's powers were pretty typical for the superhero genre. Superhero strength, durability, good at fighting, but he never really got to prove himself outside of that, because on his second ever mission, Thunderbird is killed off in a plane crash, MASH style. But don't worry, just like everyone else in comic books, he comes back. I mean, other than Uncle Ben, of course, but anyways. He'd come back in spirit form every now and then, and fully back to life a few times during the events of Chaos Wars in the comics. But his death is actually what inspires his more well-known brother James, or as most fans know him, Warpath, to become a hero. I'm just saying, that's why it's weird when somebody who was so pivotal to the X-Men history is only ever seen once in the animated series, and that's in the opening credits and he's running with Magneto. But he actually is pretty good in The Gifted, so he's got that going for him. Number 7, Polaris. Speaking of The Gifted, great show. Seriously, really needed a season 3. But the lead of the show is actually another major X-Men character who rarely leaves the pages, Polaris. And this omission is made even more odd considering that she was one of the first characters to join outside of the original lineup, joining in X-Men Volume 1, number 60 in 1969. But in all fairness, she wasn't actually revealed to be Magneto's daughter until Uncanny X-Men number 430 in 2003. While never outright said in the show, Lorna Dane is the daughter of Magneto, and her powers are exactly like her father's and looks exactly like her half-sisters. So none of this was actually known at the time of the animated series, but it definitely is one of the better retcons in comic book history. It did leave a great relationship between the entire family in 2009's Wolverine and the X-Men cartoon, with Quicksilver off running his own version of the Brotherhood. Scarlet Witch is trying to get her dad's attention, but he just is too protective of his only child to have his abilities. A version of this Polaris could actually easily play off of MCU's Wanda so well. Number 6, Forge. It's hard to say who exactly is the smartest character in the Marvel Universe, but Forge is by far the smartest mutant. This, combined with his ability to let him understand the details of anything he encounters, makes him basically a superpowered inventor. He's made everything from time machines to cybernetic weapons, the Blackbird, and even a portable black hole in the comics. He's been in every animated series, but he's always just been a background supporting character, and honestly, that suits him best. But there is now a great way to bring him into the MCU. Forge has always been in the shadows of Tony Stark, and after Tony stops being an arms dealer to the Pentagon, Forge takes his place in the Uncanny X-Men number 184. And definitely with the upcoming Armor Wars film, he fit in perfectly along with all the other Stark-based villains. Number 5, Dazzler. Oh, Dazzler. No characters had more attempts to get off the ground than Dazzler. She appears in the pilot of the Pride of the X-Men, canned. Her cameo in X-Men Apocalypse, where she was played by Taylor Swift, deleted scene. And even Hulu tried to make a Tigra and Dazzler TV show in the same vein as the MODOK show, but that was scrapped before it was even made. And she was even supposed to lead a film on the very first comic book movie starring Bo Derek. But, you know. But at least she got an appearance in the absolute banger that is the X-Men Arcade Cabinet, since, that was actually based off the failed pilot of the first animated series. Dazzler is a musician with powers that turn sound into light. She started out as the disco queen of the 70s, but she was shifted into the rock or pop depending on the era. But the backlash against disco was rough, and now looking on that time period with newer 2023 eyes, we can see that the hate against disco was actually the backlash against people of color and gay visibility in the 1970s, and I think we should really re-examine Dazzler as a character now. Number 4, Northstar. Speaking of LGBT X-Men characters, the very first gay character by any major comic book publisher was Northstar, and he had to have his entire identity firmly hidden behind the comic book code authority, leaving any gay implication to be just subtext. Real subtle, guys. He even got married in comics in 2012, marking the first depiction of a gay wedding in comic books. And with his significance to the gay community still firmly intact, this French-Canadian hero is actually pretty awesome. He's a speedster, but with more abilities that make more sense to somebody who can run at that speed should realistically have. He can punch just as fast, his bones are practically invulnerable, and after he can start moving at the speed of light, he can create explosive thermal energy. And shy of cosmic characters like Silver Surfer or Nova, Northstar is actually one of the fastest characters in the entirety of the Marvel Universe. And while he's mainly a pacifist in the main continuity, his best version actually came in the comic run of Age of Apocalypse, where he became an evil enforcer to the elite mutant force and could just be anywhere at all times. Number 3, Dokken. In the most bummer of origin stories, back in 1946, Wolverine and his pregnant wife Itsu were living happily in Japan when the Winter Soldier was sent in to kill them. Itsu dies, yet Wolverine isn't given enough time to mourn and he needs to run. But the child still lives. He is named Dokken, literally meaning bastard dog in Japanese. And this is what happens when having neither of your parents at your birth does to a person. Dokken has all of the powers of his father, but his healing is slightly different. He still feels all of the pain, but he can do it on command. And it takes a lot longer for the pain to die down, so he turns to hardcore drugs, the heat pills, to ease his pain. And no matter how many times Wolverine tries to redeem his son, no. He's just a bad dude. And honestly, he's an entertaining villain, so it's okay. To date, there actually hasn't been a single adaptation of Dokken. Like, if anything, he should have shown up in Logan instead of the random, out-of-nowhere clone. So if the MCU wants a completely clean slate and not have to recast Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, Dokken is ready to go. Number 2, Sunfire. And definitely the most powerful character to never make an impact outside of the comic books, Sunfire has the ability to harness the power of the sun and redirect it. Shiro Yoshida can redirect the energy into plasma that can surround himself and shoot out and blast. His heat is said to reach 1 million degrees Fahrenheit and is on par with the Human Torch, but unlike Johnny Storm, he can actually control all of the heat inside of his range. And for being the equivalent of Japan's version of Captain America, it's actually really weird that the team that he founded in the comic books has actually already made its way into a large big budget film, The Big Hero 6. The comic book version, that is, and with this version of Baymax. Either way, because his film rights were still with Fox at the time of Big Hero 6, Sunfire and Silver Samurai were scrapped from the film, but it is nice to see the small reference to him in the Baymax show on Disney+. Now that the deal is finalized, you never know. Number 1, Bishop. Oh man, if there's any character that belongs in the number 1 spot, it's Bishop. Literally the coolest character from the 1990s animated series, and just an all-around badass. Bishop is a time-traveling anti-hero from a dystopian future who can absorb energy and is trying to right the wrongs of the past. His powers make him immensely powerful, and there's actually no limit to what he can do. And on top of that, he's got all of the combat training from decades of war in the future. And he comes back time and time again to avert all kinds of catastrophe before they even start. So why is it in Days of Future Past, a film about time travel, does this guy just die from being shot with energy? I get it, everyone in the future timeline dies to raise the stakes, or whatever, but his powers are literally to absorb energy, and there should have been literally any other way to do this. It's like saying oh, Iceman is in this film, and he just froze to death. That's what this scene was like with Bishop. Marvel bringing Bishop in as he is from the comic books could probably cause a problem, since his whole deal is that he came to the past to change the future in a single timeline, Back to the Future style. And what we learned in Avengers Endgame is that the MCU uses multiversal logic.
So Back to the Future is a bunch of bullshit.
Then again, that could also just be a plot point. He time travels knowing that he can never go back to his old version. I mean, why would he? But yeah, there's many more X-Men out there that I know that I missed, and if you've got one that you think needs more love in the MCU, let me know down in the comments down below. And if you liked today's video, hit that like button and subscribe for more weekly content on comic books and nerd stuff. I've been Eric, and you've been awesome.